The Injured Senior Podcast is here to help. Like it or not, the senior and elderly population is vulnerable to negligence committed by medical professionals, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, pharmaceutical and medical device companies, insurance companies, and everyday individuals and businesses. Your host, Steve Heisler, creator of the National Injured Senior Law Center, has been advocating for seniors' rights for over 30 years and is bringing you answers to your questions. This is the Injured Senior Podcast.
Greetings to all in the injured senior community, and I hope all is well. This is Steve Heisler, CEO and founder of the National Injured Senior Law Center, and you are listening to a brand new edition of the Injured Senior Podcast. The Injured Senior Podcast is a show dedicated to discussing medical and legal issues of vital importance to the injured senior and elderly population, as well as their families, loved ones, and caregivers. We are sponsored by the National Injured Senior Law Center. They are the advocates for seniors and the elderly who are harmed by the negligence of others. Serious injuries to seniors and the elderly can rip their world wide apart, and medical expenses from the injuries can rob them of their life savings. If you believe that you have been harmed by someone's negligence, like a medical professional or nursing home, go to www.injuredseniorhotline.com or call 877-228-4878 to get some help. Today we have Dr. Pamela Teaster with us to talk about public guardianships and whether it is in the best interest of incapacitated people. Now, Dr. Teaster, my friends, is a professor and director of the Center for Gerontology at Virginia Tech University. That's right, the Hokies. She is the co-author of the book, Public Guardianships, in the Best Interest of Incapacitated People. Hello, Dr. Teaster, or as I've been instructed from this point on, Pam. How are you, Pam?
Hi, I'm fine, Steve. Thanks for having me.
I'm really glad to have you here. You definitely have a long history of some really, really great work in the area of elder abuse as well as public guardianships. So can you tell our listeners what exactly is a public guardianship?
Okay. It's a great question, and it's really the first question when you talk about public guardians. So, public guardians are guardians of last resort, and that's the most important thing to understand about them. So, when a person is deemed to lack capacity, and that would be a determination by a court, then that person, if he or she has no responsible or willing person or appropriate person to make decisions on his or her behalf, like a surrogate decision maker, then the state is appointed as the guardian, and that is what makes it a public guardian. Those are in each state. They're generally a little bit different in each state because of the various statutes, because guardianship is a creature of the courts and states. So it's the state guardian of last resort.
Okay. Now, this is the Injured Senior Podcast, and our listeners are mostly seniors and the elderly, as well as their children and caregivers. Do public guardianships mostly occur with seniors and elderly individuals who might be deemed incapacitated, or how much of the public guardianship arena is actually involving getting guardianships over the senior and elderly population?
So the work I do has indicated that more guardianships are for older adults than for younger.
Okay. And why is that, you think?
The reason that we would get a guardianship, for example, might be because of a head injury, a stroke, dementia, depending, maybe mild cognitive impairment that is exacerbating. Also, if people have mental illness sometimes and can't make decisions, sometimes because they have developmental or intellectual disabilities. And this is all stuff that can that can get, that can worsen over time as a person gets older. Some don't, but some do. And so more older adults than younger adults tend to be in public guardianship programs across the country.
Okay, so does that mean that the seniors or elderly who become wards of a public guardian or become wards of a public guardianship, does that mean that that you said it's the last resort? Does that mean that they don't have any family or that there's no one else to take care of them?
Yes, that's what that would mean. If there could be another identified person who would come forward, we wouldn't need to have a public guardian. And sometimes later on, that person does come forward, and then the public programs then change who the guardian is, and another more appropriate person would be that. We would assume mostly that a family member or a trusted friend would be a better guardian than the state guardian, simply because they would know that individual and his or her preferences. Same thing for appointing a power of attorney, for example. Right.
So of the total amount of guardianships, and I know you can probably only give us a ballpark figure, but for all the total public guardianships, any type of guardianships in the country, about how many of them would you say are public guardianships?
Steve, you're getting into territory I can't answer exactly. But because nobody knows how many people are under guardianship in any state in this country. However, the assumption is that public guardians are a small fraction of the number of guardianships in the country, which are what we would call private. Attorneys do them, family members are guardians. They're a small fraction of that.
All right. So it's not really a large amount of the total guardianships in your best guess.
Right. And we wouldn't want it to be, because again, it truly should be a guardianship of last resort.
Could you just give a brief history of how public guardianships came about?
Sure, but it's a long time ago. So actually, this really has its derivative in English common law, and so you will understand the focus on the sovereign and understand the focus on movement of property. So the sovereign had a tremendous interest in moving property from one generation to another, and so the genesis of it was to take care of subjects of the realm, and so in that way, then people would have someone who would take care of them, like the sheriffs, who would take care of a person who maybe had mental illness or some kind of dementia, even in those particular times, back in the Middle Ages. In Virginia, that's my home state, back in the early 90s, we still had sheriffs serving as the public guardian, and it was not until the late 90s that our own state developed a system of public guardianship that was housed in the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services. The derivative of it is right there in Virginia, for example.
So are you saying that in the 1990s that the sheriffs would be the ones that took care of their bank accounts or paid their bills or looked after the wards, the individuals who were under public guardianship?
I am saying that in the early 1990s up through at least 1998, that was what the sheriffs did. Yeah, so they were the public guardian in Virginia until the program was created that I mentioned.
Wow. All righty.
It is wow. But you see why. I mean, I think it's sort of a fork dropper at a lunch table, but understanding the history of it would tell you why it was housed in that way.
Yeah, I mean, you see a sheriff's car pull up, and you're wondering if he's coming there to arrest you or take you to your doctor's appointment. It's just kind of Well, it's good that that's not the case anymore. I don't know if that's the best use of our public resources. This is Steve Heisler, and you are listening to the Injured Senior Podcast, and I am talking to Dr. Pam Teaster, who is an expert in public guardianships. Pam, let me ask you this. Why should people who are listening to this podcast, why should they be concerned about public guardianships?
That's a really nice question, because I think a lot of people don't even know it exists. I know when I was a graduate student and I decided that this would be the area I do my research on, my major professor went, "The state can do that?" So even people who were fairly knowledgeable about all the functions of government didn't know about this peculiar function. And why should you care? Because there are a number of people who are under guardianship in this country, probably more than we even know about because of the records issue, and it is a significant loss of civil rights. Some scholars say it can unperson someone, but it is also a really important state function that deserves oversight because of the significant loss of rights. However, it also preserves the remaining ones individuals have.
So what type of civil rights are you talking about?
When the guardianship is total or plenary, it's everything. So it in effect reduces an adult to the legal status of a child. So can't vote, can't marry, can't direct your own health care, can't contract. It's pretty significant when it is a guardianship for the person and the property.
Yeah, we had Dr. Sam Sugar on last week, talked about just professional guardianships and guardianships in general, and how the civil rights are totally just eliminated. And it's really atrocious, and it's very alarming.
Steve, it is very atrocious and alarming when it is done poorly. And and I know Dr. Sugar, and I'm in contact with him, going to speak at one of his summits for a little bit. When it is not done well and appropriately, it is atrocious. But on the other hand, it is the beneficent authority of the state to come in and take care of a person who cannot make decisions for him or herself. And so in the protective function of the state, it is doing a wonderful favor to people. And in fact, for many people, it improves their quality of life. So it's not an evil dragon unless it's done wrong, or evil dragons are doing the guardianship.
No, that makes sense. My question is, are you seeing more of the former or the latter?
You know, I've done a bit of research on bad guardians. I've done a lot of research on financial exploitation. I was recently funded by the Retirement Research Foundation to look at surrogate perpetrators, and I am just not seeing huge numbers of exploiting, abusing, and neglecting guardians.
That's
now,
really
it could
good
be
news.
that the sources that I do my research with are not catching those cases, and we know abuse, neglect, and exploitation is underreported a lot. So I'll say that up front because I know it as a researcher, and I know it as a philosopher. But on the other hand, we even ran studies longer to try to see more of it, and it just wasn't reported. The dragons in the surrogate perp study are the powers of attorney.
Really? So it's the powers of attorney, and usually a power of attorney is a family member, right?
That's correct. And if you read much research on elder abuse, you will know that the predominant relationship of people who are abusing are family members.
Yeah, we've had Paul Greenwood on the show to talk about that, and yeah, it's he even gives like a profile of the typical abuser of an elderly person, and it's usually like a 40-year-old son. But that's something that we talked about on another episode. Okay, so let me ask you this: the guardians themselves. Now you said some were sheriffs, but now.
Well, they were. I really don't think any state has a sheriff still as a guardian. This was just the case in Virginia before the law changed.
Got it. So who is usually chosen as a guardian, or how do how do they
as a public guardian?
Pick? Yes, as a public guardian.
These are the individuals who are actually public servants. They're people who are employed by the state and at least to serve in this capacity as a public guardian. Important to stress that it is not the individual state employee who is the guardian, and this is really important about public guardianship, the guardian becomes the state. So the public guardian program is the named guardian. That's an important distinction from perhaps a paid professional guardian or family member who's a guardian, because it would mean that your friend Bob Smith, who is a government employee, might leave the service of government, but the guardianship would remain with the state. So that's the important distinction, and that's an important good thing.
Great. No, I understand that. So is it normally like someone from Adult Protective Services, or is there like a department for public guardians?
Yes. For example, in Virginia, there's a Virginia Public Guardian and Conservator program, and it is housed in the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services. They're sort of often housed in that ilk of a bureau or a department within state government. APS can serve as a guardian in some states. Like, for example, I know, having done some research in the state of New York, which really doesn't have a public guardian program, that APS in some counties or jurisdictions serves as the guardian. But I have a problem with it philosophically.
And why is that?
Why? Because the function of APS, and I study APS a lot. I'm beholden to them all for a lot of studies. APS function is to investigate abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So that's a big job, and that is what APS should do. It should not be in the business of surrogate decision making. And another philosophical reason would be you shouldn't appoint a state actor who then could not report on him or herself if they were nefarious, right? So it's a big old conflict of interest.
Right. So there's not really any good oversight over the guardians from Adult Protective Services. Would that be accurate?
It's certainly not the best arrangement. But
yeah.
I'm sure Dr. Sugar would have said guardians are in short supply, and therein lies one of the problems of guardianship.
Right. So you don't have a large pool to pick from.
No, and as you might imagine, people who are persons under public guardians are not easy cases. These are real complex cases when they come to the public guardian.
That's a good point.
Often people have no money too, and so there's no way to pay somebody much for serving as a public guardian. You'd want to try to keep people out of the public guardian program if you possibly could. But on the other hand, there wouldn't be much money to attach to a person who has none.
That makes sense. And thank you for that. This is Steve Heisler, and you're listening to the Injured Senior Podcast, and we are talking to Dr. Pamela Teaster. Now, Dr. Teaster, you are an expert in elder abuse. Your wheelhouse is not just restricted to public guardianships, and you've written some articles about sexual abuse in residential care settings. So, what kind of sexual abuse are we talking about?
That is really a determination by statute. So it depends on what the state regards as what is sexual abuse. But when we did our study, and I did that with the wonderful Dr. Holly Ramsey Klosnick, she and I used a wide definition of what sexual abuse was, including kissing and fondling, as touching, not just rape, but a wider definition, and ultimately left it up to what the state and we did this through Adult Protective Services. So whatever APS said sexual abuse was in the states that we studied, that's what it was.
Okay. And I mean, how prevalent is it? How much is it going on to the best of your knowledge?
Good question. I want to know that. I have not conducted a prevalence study. My studies are generally more on the intervention, investigation, outcome side of things. Of the people who have done the work on the prevalence of this, 0.5%. One study got up to the one I ever saw that was the highest was about 7%. So it's not a huge number. But again, we know that there are underreports of abuse. If this one, and I've written it, is the most taboo of all the kinds of abuse, then wouldn't we expect that this is the most underreported of all kinds of abuse?
Now, in your research, did you find that it was more from staff or other residents, or kind of like a mixture?
Other residents.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. And
Yeah.
can you get?
Do you want to know my take on that?
Yeah, sure. That's why we have you on the show, Dr. Teaster.
I guess you do. So here was an interesting thing we discovered, and then we could talk about that a little. So what we discovered was when there was an allegation of sexual abuse by a resident in the facility, that was generally substantiated. When there was an allegation of sexual abuse by staff in a facility, that was generally not substantiated by APS. So it was surprising that there was a reticence. I'm not saying necessarily that staff are sexually abusing residents, not anything like that. But I'm saying of the cases that were reported to APS, there were often more allegations coming in of sex abuse by staff, but what came out as substantiated was sex abuse by residents.
Why do you think that is?
I knew you'd ask that, and I wrote about it. I think it is easier for. I think it's a difficult report to investigate. I think it is easier to substantiate abuse by a resident than it is by a staff member, for one thing, and when you use an expansive definition of sexual abuse, I think there just would be more sexual abuse, but there are more residents involved in a facility who might be sexually abusing than there are staff who might be sexually abusing. But I think, when it's a staff member, it's more difficult to prove. I think some facilities are hesitant to report a staff member. Most are not, but some are. But that accounts for part of that problem.
Yeah.
And it's just easier to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
But for the two of those, the solutions are quite different. So if you found in a national study like we did that the predominant sex abuse was by residents, the remedies are quite different from those for staff. I did also find in some of the work we did some racism. This work was 10 years ago now, but perhaps sometimes staff members were blamed more readily. It was just surprising. Some of the staff members who were blamed and then went to courts were sometimes more often not a very diverse population, but not always. I was just surprised that sometimes it was the black orderly, and I thought, I'm wondering that really could be the case. Not a big enough sample to make any profound statement about Steve because it was all a small number, but it was just I added that in the mix of some early work that was done.
No, that's interesting, and if that is the case, that's definitely
a problem.
Very that's problematic, and Now, it's interesting. We had Dr. Nicole Diddick on the show a couple weeks ago. She is a gerontologist in Canada. Mm-hmm. Now, it's interesting. She talks about sex in residential settings, residential care settings between residents. And she actually says that if, like dad gets a girlfriend in a nursing home or in an assisted living, that maybe it's not a bad thing. So I'm just wondering if there's like a fine line between sexual abuse and just two elderly individuals who are, just developing a relationship or in a relationship. Did you see anything like that maybe caught your eye?
That's a really wonderful question, and of course we have had to wrestle with that. And as an ethicist, another thing in my wheelhouse, we certainly don't want to limit the freedom of any individual, regardless of the care setting they're in. When it becomes problematic is when the capacity issue begins to surface, as you know, as an attorney. so the sex abuse part, of course, comes when there is sex that is unwanted, and it moves along in many, to the extreme. It's a crime. When it is kissing and fondling, I don't think anybody's going to court over that, but it's unwanted, and we classify it as sex abuse, so I do need to know that. For adults who are consenting, why does sex stop at a particular age? It shouldn't. And could two adults with mild cognitive impairment be consenting and have sex that they should be able to have? Well, of course. So we wouldn't want to call any two people at a facility, even with mild cognitive impairment, people who are one person who is sexually abusing another. In fact, we would want to promote that. I think we would. Family members, I'm sure this professor you talked to mentioned this. Some of the problems lie around the family members who have a problem with that for a whole lot of reasons. Some care providers have a problem with that for reasons we may or may not discuss on this podcast. But we want to promote. We do as adults want to promote sex and happiness and flourishing at all kinds of ages with all kinds of intellectual capacity, as long as a person is able to make decisions about his or her own body. That's what we want.
No, it's really thought provoking, and there's no easy answer as to it's something obviously we're getting.
It even comes up in guardianship. Often, I think the guardians even have a question about, should they allow an individual under guardianship to have sex with another person? I think they struggle with that one. And the answer is, as I know as an attorney, it depends.
Yeah, well, if it's someone with Alzheimer's or somebody, like you said, is cognitively challenged or impaired, it gets a little more fuzzy.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, Pam, I know you feel like you've just been interrogated by Mike Wallace. I want to thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule over there at Virginia Tech to be with us today. And all kidding aside, that's really good information that you just gave us. And I'm definitely going to want to have you back, because there are so many different topics in your wheelhouse and things that you really do have a lot of expertise on.
Yeah, I'll tell you one right now, Steve, that I'm working on. They all have relationships to each other, as you can imagine. I know your listeners will recognize that. The thing that we're working on today is working on end-of-life decision-making for people. And this is a thing called POST. At least in Virginia, it's called that, Physician Orders for Scope of Treatment. And we're trying to work on that for individuals in rural areas. So often older adults who have about a year to live. And so we're doing some research on that as I speak on that topic right now.
Oh, that's definitely a big interest. We have a lot of listeners who live in rural America, and so that definitely is pertinent. And we're going to want to have you on to talk about that.
I will like
now,
that.
Yeah, Pam, if anybody wants to get in touch with you to discuss any of these topics, I know you're a professor. You're not I don't think you practice gerontology and see patients or whatever. But if someone wanted to contact you to maybe discuss some of the issues we talked about today, what's the best way to reach you?
I think the best thing to do would be able to, one of two things. One would be to call the Center for Gerontology at Virginia Tech. And all you have to do is look on a website at Virginia Tech Center for Gerontology, and there it will be. And our wonderful operations coordinator will find me and get me a message. The less reliable, although possible, thing to do is you can easily Google me. There I'll be. Some picture, who knows how many years ago, but I probably still look like that. If you can find my email address, you're welcome to email me. Once in a while, I lose them because I get a lot of them. So that's why I would say if you have a burning question, call, because I know my operations coordinator will get to me with that. Less reliable, but still, I get about 300 or 400 emails a day. I'll usually get to as many as I can in a day.
300 to 400 emails to the gerontology department?
No, to me.
Just to you?
Yes.
Wow. Well, that's about 300 to 400
I'm
more
sure
emails
it's
than
about
I get.
300 less than you get, Steve.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you've been doing this a long time, so I guess that's a testament to your good work. People, they want to get some good information, and you're the person to see about that. All right, Pam. Well, thanks again for being on the show, and we're going to have you back soon.
Steve, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. Keep doing your good work.
I appreciate it. Injured senior and aging population community, thanks for listening to today's episode. I want to again thank Dr. Pamela Teaster for appearing on the show today. She did a wonderful job and just so much great information. If you love the Injured Senior Podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes. If you want to share a story that you have about guardianship or any type of elder abuse, we would be happy to talk to you and possibly have you come on the show to tell us about your experience. Or if you just have any suggestions or comments about the show, you can email me at steve@injuredseniorpodcast.com. I definitely respond to all emails and would love to chat with you or exchange emails. So until next time, I am so looking forward to next week's show, my friends. It was so great to spend some time with you. Stay safe, and I will talk to you soon. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Injured Senior Podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate, subscribe, review, and share on Apple, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. Connect with us at injuredseniorpodcast.com and sign up for our newsletter. To find out more or to get help at any time, visit injuredseniorpodcast.com or call 855-622-6530. That's 855-622-6530.